Dr. Ghorbani will present his research on China and the new generation of entrepreneurs, and presents the interesting question as to whether this can be a model for other developing countries. Dr. Ghorbani's presentation will be followed by a question and answer period. Without further ado, I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Rosalie. Also, Rosalie should say that she's also my supervisor during my PhD studies. So, thank you for coming here. I'm a little bit jittery just because of a lot of coffee and because my mother-in-law is also in the audience. She's the hardest judge here. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about about 30 years of living in China. Well, actually, altogether I lived in China for 17 years out of the past 30 years. So this presentation is going to be based on 3 research papers that I've done. Since I was trying to gear it towards more practitioners, so I'm not going to present any of the data in that sense or analysis in that sense, but I'm going to just tell you guys about a little bit about results of what's happening in China, or what has been happening in China. And then first I have to start off with saying that even though I think China is very special, so there are a lot of things to learn about it. But it's not that, for example, China is huge on entrepreneurship, relatively speaking. So if you look at this data, you can see that this is the ranking of entrepreneurial intention around the world based on the Global Entrepreneurship Index. As you can see, US is the #1, Canada is #3. Some people might say, like, Canada? Well, how could it be possible? This is more about intention. The way the data is collected is that it measures whether there are infrastructures over there, whether people are willing to do it, whether there is a freedom to do it, and so on, so on. So as you can see, that China ranks 43rd in the world. Some people might say it's also tied to GDP, which is here. It kind of is, but it also isn't, because you can see, like, for example, India with 5,000 GDP of $5,000 is actually ranking much higher than Russia or Brazil in that sense. Oh, by the way, if you see GDP of Taiwan is 0, it doesn't mean that they don't have GDP just because Taiwan is a part of China associated with that. That's why they don't report it. But I think Taiwan's GDP, because it's based on 2011 US dollar, it should be somewhere between $25,000 to $27,000 per person. So again, you see that it's even ranked higher than Korea, but has a lower GDP compared to that. So, but then, what is it about China? It's about innovation that is happening and trends that are happening there. The things that has happened over there that make it very special. Like, for example, out of the most innovative countries that are ranked, again, by World Intellectual Property Organization, China is the only country that is on top 20, 35 countries that are all developed countries, but China is not. China is the only developing country out of those top 35 countries that are ranked there. And innovation, why is innovation important? Well, a lot of developing countries obviously think that it is something for them to go or pull out of this concept of developing and become developed. So that's why they try very hard. And one of the things that they do basically is by improving their innovation capacity. So you can see that down here, as it says, the top 10 countries that are basically putting a lot of money in their GDP, in R&D as a portion of their GDP is China, and China is the #1, and India is #10. So, it's a huge drive that many of these countries want to improve their innovation. Again, innovation is not 100% based on R&D. R&D is an important factor, but it's not 100% based on that. By the way, if you have any questions also, you can ask quick ones, but I'll try to leave enough time at the end to ask questions. So, but I have a question for you guys. So what are China's inventions, historical inventions, past, from very, very long time ago?
Paper?
Paper?
Gunpowder.
Gunpowder.
Compass?
Compass?
Sunglasses.
Sunglasses. I've not heard of that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Ice cream, yes. There are a bunch of very interesting things that we can actually see. Books, printing, both of them, paper, gunpowder, which is fireworks, compass, noodles, although Italians are talented, but yeah, noodles, candy, kite, wheelbarrow, something that we all use, and an umbrella. So it has been an innovating country, nation, for the past however thousands of years that has been there. And they're still being innovative, and there's still this drive basically is there that's basically some of the entrepreneurs, some of the people in China try to do it and try to basically pull it through. These are some of the billionaires of China, as well as some of the very famous entrepreneurs. It doesn't mean that they're ranked like that. I just wrote them there as some of the older ones and until some of the newer ones. I think the first one already dead, I think it's the first one who died last year. And then this last one just sold his business, which is that guy, sold his business for a few $1 billion. And I guess he has his hands into some of the ventures still, but he's no longer an entrepreneur in that sense, unless I don't know what he's doing right now. But what China has done for the past, ever since 1978, ever since the open door policy had started, is a bunch of things that people like these guys have done. People who basically did care about what they want to do and wanted to provide or create something that's just, of course, for themselves as well, but also help people. So we can see that these ones, many of them are in older industries, and the younger you get, meaning that the lower ones, you can see that all of them are technology-oriented companies, like Alibaba, Baidu, Xiaomi, and Ele.me, which is an online service to order food, which is huge. We don't have it the same scale here, but it's really, really huge if anyone has one. And not only these ones are the ones, but there are so many different ones. I mean, there's just so many that it's just writing them or listing them here may not be necessarily possible. Some of the ones started, like for example, Sany company started from copying other companies by first actually being OEM, providing OEM for Komatsu and Caterpillar, heavy machinery kind of like builders, manufacturers, and now basically they're become one of the contenders. They're basically competing with these companies because of their quality that they have. Shanghai Auto and Beijing Auto are basically constantly innovating and trying to be innovative with many different kinds of cars. Like for example, Shanghai Auto has a joint venture with Volkswagen that's now that have outsourced in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. And they came up with the new version of Volkswagen, which is actually not Volkswagen's. It's actually Volkswagen China, or Shanghai Volkswagen. So it's nothing to do with Volkswagen headquarters in Germany. So they developed it themselves. And similar to that, you might say, okay, this is as a result of joint venture, and they might have learned or stolen the ideas from Volkswagen. But there are also many other ones. Like for example, this one that I really like. Well, partially, I think actually it's a very nice car. But also because my old classmate from Peking University, he is one of the founders of the company that is here. So this is when they came up with this car. November 16th, 2017 was launched. It was the fastest electric SUV. And they claim to be better and running faster and running for a longer time than Tesla. They have many, many innovative things, and they're launching a new sedan as well. One of the things that actually makes me very, very proud of them is that, like for example, how long does it take for you guys to fill up your tank in your car when you go to gas station? Approximately.
5 minutes.
About 5 minutes. So they have come up with an idea, a concept, that you can fill up, well, I say fill up, charge your battery in 3 minutes. 100%. Of course, it is a little bit misleading to say charge, because they're not charging. So they, similar to Tesla, in 1 hour it can charge to 90% if you want to plug it in. But they're building stations in Beijing and Shanghai that's almost similar to gas station. So they put the battery exactly underneath, and then put in the system clips and bolts in a way that in 3 minutes it raises the car, takes the battery down, puts in a new battery, and there you go, 100% charged. And it goes for 600 kilometers in perfect condition before it needs kind of like recharging. So similar to that, actually a new sports car also came out just this year. They announced with German engineering, I think, that is also going to compete with these guys. So another company that is the subject of my talk a little bit more is Alibaba, and a lot of you guys might have heard about it. Jack Ma was one of those entrepreneurs who did it. And as you can see that, only one company with the concept of 11/11, which is Remembrance Day, and it just happens to be also my birthday. So I'm very proud, very funny that day as well. So on November 11th, which they called it initially Singles Day, because it's 4 single guys in the same room, their sales has increased to 1 day only on their platform, $25.3 billion. So put into a context, Black Friday in the entire US, across all the markets, all the sellers, basically they sold 1.35 billion. So that's only one company selling. So you might know about Alibaba, but to just talk about it a little bit more. So they have all those platforms, Taobao, Tmall, Alibaba International, 1688, and several other platforms that they sell those things. And one of the big phenomena that is a totally different topic is that majority of these purchases were actually done by mobile devices. So people are sitting there in the middle of the night waiting for the clock to roll to November 11th, and then exactly at 12 o'clock 00, the sale starts. And then there are numbers that they say like how much they sell. But you can see that 90% of the gross merchandise value basically was sold over the mobile phone. So a lot of people say like, okay, so they just like e-tailer, so what? They have copy, we have eBay, we have Amazon, or we have like, for example, Walmart or many other ones. But the significant thing about these guys and their entrepreneurial or innovation ideas is not that they're selling so much, is the amount of transactions. Because if you go to their website, they do not claim to be retailers. They claim to be a technology company. Think about this. Visa, the credit card company, the fastest, at the top of their time, which is around Black Friday or around Christmas or at that time, they process 24,000 transactions per second. Whereas Alibaba, think about that power, 120,000 transactions per second. So think about what kind of computers they should have, what kind of things that the technology they should have to handle this. If you remember, when Donald Trump was elected as a president, I was in China, I was watching everything just per minute. I remember just because he was elected as president, a lot of people checked out how to immigrate to Canada. And over half an hour, the servers crashed basically. Just like the servers were down for days, just because just a few 100,000 people, or maybe a few thousand people, I don't know how many people, went to that website to check what it was. So think about that, 120,000 transactions per second. So that's a very, very massive thing. But this is not only what they've done. What they have done, they have revolutionized a lot of things in China. And one of those things is that they have given access to entrepreneurs to do their business. Not only entrepreneurs in big cities, but it actually has enabled a lot of new types of entrepreneurs. So who are these entrepreneurs? So of course, a lot of you guys might know that the majority of entrepreneurs, this area is basically very, very Jiangxi, and Zhejiang province are the center where all the manufacturing of many things basically is happening. So some of the beginning basically that it started was, for example, this guy. I don't remember his name. I used to remember his name, but I just don't know why I suddenly just went out of my mind. So if anyone in the audience knows his name, please let me know. So he started in a village that didn't really have access to a lot of kind of infrastructure at the beginning. But he basically gets his mobile devices, he searches on the internet, and he sees IKEA products. And says like, these are easy to make. Maybe I should make something similar. So he starts copying IKEA products and starting his own platform on Taobao to sell over there. And of course, he sells it for cheaper than Taobao. So very soon, everybody wants to buy the cheaper stuff that he sells, like compared to going to IKEA to buy over there, particularly because they deliver very, very fast. So he basically develops this. As a result, basically his business picks up. He thinks that maybe he needs help, so he asks his relatives in the village to come and help. And he says, to try to keep it secret because we don't want anyone else to come and copy us. So, but very soon, the other villagers basically said like, why are these trucks coming and going once in a while? What did you do? What are they loading and unloading? So everybody starts getting curious and they start asking. And at some point, this guy realizes that he has such a demand for his products that he decides to actually, instead of hiding it, he decides to share information. So he shares the information and asks other people whom basically are not really necessarily educated, particularly on online platforms and stuff. And they say like, well, we don't know, we can get big things, but you come and manage us. So he basically, instead of actually coming and building, he starts designing and he starts managing other people. And very soon, the entire village is producing, manufacturing basically IKEA style kind of furniture. And he basically, because he wants to thank Alibaba and Jack Ma, who has started that, they named one of the streets in the village Mayundaka, which means Jack Ma's street. So they named it just because they wanted to thank Jack Ma. Similar to this guy, there are lots of different ones. Like this other guy, he basically is first making things for North Face and such. And very soon he starts thinking that, why should I do this for other people? I can do myself. I can do actually something that is different than that. So he thinks actually much better, much more carefully, and he starts coming up with his own brand, which is called Beishanlang, North Mountain Wolf. So you can see again, even though it's entrepreneurial in some way, but again, it's a little bit of copying because copying North Face, he still uses the character or the word North. He doesn't want to divert too much from the original concept. But very soon, basically the entire village starts making those tents and other outdoor equipment. And both of these guys they're super rich kind of people right now in China. Particularly he, I think he has internationalized his brand and basically he's selling all around the world now. And it's only not those industries. There are so many other ones, like things that basically in the past maybe people didn't even think about. Like for example, old-fashioned like clothes or costumes that are using the old style, the old way of making those fashions and clothes and selling them over the internet. And apparently there's a huge demand for it. And it's not only these young guys that have been enabled. It's that many of those villages, as a result of this, basically were developed, and the government very soon built infrastructure, because of course trucks are coming and going, want them to load and unload, and they need access, roads, infrastructure. So all of these roads basically started coming and being built because the government also can tax them. And basically everything worked together. And not only the younger people were part of this, older people started getting into this. So I have not talked to this lady myself, but she apparently hears the idea and she asks her grandchildren to help her set up a store. So she's from Xinjiang area, which is a relatively poor area of China, and she basically sets up the store on Taobao and sells all her dry fruit and fresh fruit that are from Xinjiang. And she sells it all over China as well. So again, it's not only like these guys alone, just like it has enabled a lot of different types of entrepreneurs to come up with their ideas and start basically working on that. So as a result of this, some concept tried to come out. They call it Taobao villages. So what are these Taobao villages? So villages where they use Taobao as their primary e-commerce platform. The total annual e-commerce transactions exceeds RMB 10 million. That's roughly about 1.5 million US dollar or about 2 million Canadian dollars. And three, at least 10% of the village households are engaged in e-commerce. So, as of 2014, many villages, about 211 villages, basically got this designation to become Taobao villages. Very soon, because of the help of the government basically started thinking about this, that number became 1,300, over 1,300 by 2016. So, and all of that is because Jack Ma, his initial idea was to help entrepreneurs, Chinese entrepreneurs, particularly small and medium-sized, not big ones. His idea originally was. So the government, realizing this is a possibility to help the rural area to grow and basically come out of poverty and improve on into innovation and entrepreneurship, the government starts putting helping. So first, you have to also think about this, that majority of these internet companies and e-commerce companies and all of these ones are actually private firms. None of them are government owned. Maybe later on, like for example, Taobao or some of the other ones, maybe later on when they became very, very important brands, the government invested in them as a just pure investment, meaning that they don't have any decision-making role in the company. It's just like, it's similar to our government, for example, investing in some company for retirement or anything else. You know, they have invested in some of these companies, but the majority of them are actually private firms. And the rural area has a huge potential. As you can see, like only 28.4% of the rural population actually is online. That contrasts with, for example, larger cities like Beijing, Shanghai. I think the number is over 90% over there. That's our netizens. And in rural area, only 47.3% of them basically shop online. So I think, I don't remember the number for Canada, but I think for Canada still, as a developed country, we have about, I think, 55% of people shop online. So that's similar to the Chinese rural area. Because in major cities in China, for example in Beijing and Shanghai, I think the number is about 98% of the people are online, and about over 90% of the people do shop online. So when I say 55% of people in Canada shop online, that's the intention. It's not the actual number. Meaning that some of them sometimes buy online, sometimes some of them very rarely, just because they have to, or maybe once a year, do shop. And some people don't ever. Yeah? Whereas the recent study of 2017 in Beijing and Shanghai showed that 90% of those people who shop online in China do it all the time. Like I personally go to a bank, get money, but the money stays in my pocket for 3-4 months, and just because I don't want it to rot, I actually spend it. Because majority of my shopping is done on the phone. I'm just on the subway or on the bus, remember I want milk, done. So everything is done online. And that's the same for many, many, many people in China. Young people right now basically hardly ever use cash in China, particularly again in larger cities. So the government helps Alibaba, and of course they don't need help, but they basically want to just implement this practice in rural area and in the poorer area. They try to implement this in other provinces. So right now, 29 provinces, they're out of 30 some, basically are, they have like Taobao villages. So there's 600 counties, and now that number has increased to 30,000. That's a early 2018 number. That they have about 30,000 villages that basically are Taobao villages. So what has the government done then? So the government, realizing that this is essential, basically they went to provinces that are poor, like Qinghai, Sichuan, Gansu, and all these ones that are basically relatively poor. There are mountains or deserts in the area that for kilometers you don't have access to the internet. or even power. So they went and built towers to receive internet connection, basically to these places. And with the help of Alibaba, they built Taobao centers or Taobao kiosks in there. So what they have done, they have put like 2, 3, 4 computers. They train the local people, younger generation, how to use these computers to shop and to sell stuff. So they can think of anything that they want to sell. And I can, somebody in there, in that kiosk, immediately can help them to set up shop. And I can immediately start selling. And many of them basically were so very shocked that actually how they could sell things, that easily and that quickly. So they don't have to do anything really in terms of investment, massive investment. All they have to do basically just start a shop and have relationship with the suppliers or, for example, for distributors. And many of these distributors, such as Taobao and Jingdong, another big one. Jingdong, the difference between Jingdong and Taobao is that Taobao only sells other people's, provides a platform for people to set up shop, whereas Jingdong actually sells their own stuff. So they buy stuff, store them, and sell them. They also allow other people, retailers to set up, but they usually sell their own stuff. So what they do in these areas that are very remote, they use drones. So both Jingdong and Taobao, basically Alibaba, have established their own drones. I should have actually put a picture because I visited Jingdong just a few months ago, and they have like many different types of drones. Drones that basically carry up to 500 kilos of stuff. So they go to the remote areas, pick up stuff or deliver things, and then they come back. And they don't have to be, relying on other suppliers to go there. As a result of these guys, Alibaba, Jingdong, and such, China has the highest number of, what do you call them? Courier services per capita in the world. So now we order things from Amazon and they deliver it the same day, or if you pay extra, become Amazon Prime, they deliver it the same day or a couple of days later. Sometimes also they lie to you that it's available on Monday, but then suddenly when you pay, suddenly says like, no, it's available 2 weeks from now. It's a headache. I wanted to buy a present for my nephew, and that's what happened to me. Now it's going to reach it. But over there in China, this was available since 2010. You order things. The first time I ordered it, I didn't even know it. I ordered something, and somebody knocked on my door the same afternoon. And I was suspicious. I didn't even want to open the door. It's like, how is it possible? But they delivered it right away. And all of that was because of all these guys. So they have created this possibility for the rural area and a new generation, new types of entrepreneurs, which we're going to look at who they are. So what you have to think about is that they basically started from very, very beginning, meaning at 1978. I should have put this part actually later, but anyways. In 1978, we have to think that China, all of China, was actually poor. I think if I remember correctly, in 1980, per capita GDP was $500 only. $500 something. So to achieve this in such a short time is actually amazing. Not only in 1980, I remember basically when I went first there, it was 1988, exactly 30 years ago. I remember I had $500 and I went with almost one small backpack. When I was coming back 45 days later, I had 2 huge suitcases all filled with souvenirs, and I still had $200 in my pocket. It was that cheap. It was really, really amazing. So based on that, basically they started this, and they allow people to basically freely think about what they want to do. It was, again, it's hard to think of China as free economy, but in many ways, they decided to do it that way. So one thing that I observed many of these entrepreneurs do are very, very service-oriented and very, very people-oriented. So I recently basically saw some report, I don't remember, it was Wall Street Journal or which one it was, I don't remember where it was, but it was comparing, for example, Facebook with WeChat, which is one of the top internet kind of like companies or technology companies, and WhatsApp. I don't know how many people use these things. So they were comparing them, and all was at Facebook are much better. And I'm reading this article, which is actually in support of these companies, and I just said, like, no, it's not. Because WeChat is very, very consumer-oriented, whereas Facebook is very, very business-oriented. Meaning that why they're good is because they allow businesses to follow us, to take information about us, to basically, if they sell something to us, basically get all the information about us, where we go, what we do, and all that kind of stuff. And they can send advertising to us. Whereas WeChat doesn't allow that. WeChat basically is very, very people-oriented, meaning they're consumer-oriented. They cannot basically don't allow anyone. The same as Taobao, the same as Alibaba. They don't allow sellers to basically stay in touch with you and use that information to send you marketing material. They do not allow that advertisement. Another thing that basically I've noticed that, is that the government also follows. Like whenever there is a need for infrastructure, they basically follow them. They basically go there and provide those services for them, instead of basically, not caring. Even though no matter how small it is, basically if there is a business happening, the government tries to build it. And I think one thing that they have done, might be a little bit of criticism to them, is that they have not really thought about monopolization of these companies. Like for example, Jingdong and Alibaba have become so large, so massive, that and many people are now depending on them, and they're basically their hands or their arms are basically going still to more places. And of course, in Canada, we know that the second somebody becomes relatively big, either the government basically shuts them down or allows them to monopolize everything, to just basically, because you have to deal with one service provider instead of dealing with many, many different companies. And of course, it doesn't take care of the copycats or cutthroat, competition that happens in those kind of situations, because similar to many other countries, so what I'm saying here is about a number of companies, number of entrepreneurs who basically feel very, very responsible to basically do things. But still, the vast majority of the Chinese entrepreneurs are still copycats. Like for example, you open a Sichuan restaurant, the next day, next door, somebody opens exactly the same. Maybe with a different color, but it's exactly the same, even almost identical menu. And there's nothing to stop them. You sell something like IKEA stuff, somebody basically just similar to that IKEA guy, if you go to Taobao, you will see hundreds of those similar ones. But nobody made it as big as him. Why? And what is distinguishing between him and the other IKEA sellers is that because he started designing. So that's the difference between copycats and innovators. Because they take that extra mile. They start from copying, they could start from copying, but then they come up with a new concept. They add value to it. They don't continue basically copying and copying and copying. They basically just add something to it to become unique. And that's how they survive. And that's how they become big. So the other two are a little bit somehow different topic that I'm going to talk about. So that China has the largest domestic migration. As the economy is growing, of course, big cities such as Beijing has about 20 million people. Think about it in such a small area, smaller than the greater Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, 20 million people. So it doesn't matter what you sell, there's somebody to buy. And you don't have to send it too far, because everybody's right there, in a small space. So there's a lot of people basically from the rural area coming to these large cities like Beijing and Shanghai. China apparently has about 400 million internal migrants that have moved from kind of like parts of China, rural parts of China, to the largest cities. And of course, a lot of people try to migrate to China also from abroad, but China does not accept any migration, inward migration from international other countries. But let's talk about the domestic migrants. So one of the things that we have seen as a result of Taobao and many other things that the government has provided, we have seen that the massive increase on female migration. Women used to be, 20 years ago, when all these things started, women used to stay in the village, take care of their children. At least if they migrated, they used to go to nearby cities to work in factories. Grandparents used to take care of the children. But now we see more and more that women entrepreneurs, women also moving to far distances, to different cities. And also they're taking their family with them to start a shop. They're forced to go back, some of them, but not everybody goes back. So these people basically have been enabled by basically government providing those centers to set shop and also being online. So many of these mega shopping centers, they're not shopping centers in the same way as we see. We call them co-located kind of like entrepreneurship. So what is that? So the government allowed a building similar to this, usually 2-3 stories. Joni might remember, some of you guys have been to China might have seen them, like Silk Market and such. That's basically there are a number of entrepreneurs who are selling similar things, basically going to the same location. Some of them are very similar, some of them are very, very different. I was talking to Rosalie just earlier, go to Gastown, everybody's selling identical stuff. So it's not exactly like that they're selling identical stuff, but there are shops that would be selling very similar things. But there are also shops that sell very, very different things. So at the beginning, when this started, maybe about 25 years ago, it was all basically people selling there were basically, most of them were female entrepreneurs. Now, the same female entrepreneurs basically set shop both online as well as offline. So many of these places, when you go during the day, there's tons of tourists and tons of people going there shopping. If you go at night, you would see that suddenly the entire store becomes almost empty. I mean, it's amazing. 1 or 2 times I actually went very, very late and I stayed there. You see that basically almost the entire shop is almost like everything comes out and in the middle of the night they restock it. Because they sell everything that there is on their online shops. And at night, this basically, these courier services come and pick these boxes, tons of these boxes, and basically ship them to all over China or all over Beijing. I don't know exactly where they sell them. So this has enabled a lot of people. And I'll talk about the middle income trap. So all of these opportunities, again, think about the starting from that level of kind of like almost no income or very, very poor country 40 years ago. China, as of 2016, exceeded US in the number of billionaires. So those people that I showed the pictures of, those were all basically billionaires. Yeah. And there are lots more. Right now, China has 819 billionaires. Again, you might say that, oh wow, US has a quarter of the population, so obviously that's not a huge achievement. But it is a huge achievement for 2 reasons. First, 40 years ago, nobody had had any wealth, almost. None of them even had a business. And secondly, all of these guys, with the exception of the past 2 years, some of those billionaires died, all of these guys are self-made. They're all self-made. Because if you look at the Indians, Brazilians, Germany, United States, all the billionaires that we talk about, not only many of them basically have inherited their money, billions, from their parents, or maybe they were not billionaires, their parents, they had millionaires, but they had multi-million dollars and then they built an empire from there, which is, again, is a big thing, but still not a huge thing comparing it with 819 people who actually have built it themselves. So there are 2 significant things about this. It also gives hope to people, to you and I, to the new generation, that if I did it, if I went after it, I can make it. The government, being a socialist or communist country, still allows accumulation of wealth. And that basically gives entrepreneurs, new generation of entrepreneurs, hope. So, second thing is that we see that the number of women being empowered. So China, as a result of Cultural Revolution and the communist practices, basically they were told that men and women are equal. I know it's not exactly in their mindsets. If you ask a lot of Chinese, very often actually are very, very stereotyping, oh, this is not a woman's thing, or this is a man's thing. My daughter, from when she was in kindergarten, basically her professor, her teachers basically kept telling her, oh, this is not a girl thing, this is a girl thing, you should do this. But that mindset still exists. But when it comes to business, women don't think of themselves as less than anyone else. Like, so for example, one of my research that I've done, I interviewed 350 entrepreneurs in small to micro enterprises in Beijing. About 70% of them are female. And almost all of them basically done things by themselves. I think there were only 2 or 3 people who almost say that their husband was more responsible or they were relying on their husbands a lot, but the rest of them almost completely say that they made the decision, they find the suppliers, they do everything by themselves.
Majid, are you going to get into comparative tax rates as well?
Comparative tax rates. Well, I don't get to the tax rate, but there is incentive because there is no proper taxing systems basically still there. They're building it. They're coming with new tax systems every year. They add to it. But yes, there's no necessarily taxing system as we have here.
Where does the government get its money?
All the corporations still pay taxes. There are some, employees like me working, for example, all of us pay taxes. Like cab drivers pay taxes in a different way. Like for example, cab drivers are all under the umbrella of these cab companies, and cab company basically they pay some money, annual or monthly fee to cab company, and the cab company pays the government tax. But the cab drivers themselves don't pay tax. So whatever they make, they basically put it in their pocket, except for that amount. Like restaurants, they pay taxes, but they can easily hide their taxes. And unlike us, for example, CRA, if you don't pay tax as a business for 3 years, they say like, what are you doing? Close down your shop. Why are you just losing money and still in business? Whereas over there, they don't care, at least so far. But they're going to get at that. A lot of people, if you have money in the bank, investments of any kind are not taxed in China. But as of this year, they're going to start it because every day I'm receiving emails that you have to include this information, that information, and apparently very soon they're going to include that. But the taxing system is still very lax, and there are many loopholes that people can't get away. So again, that enabled women, in many different ways. One is the number that it shows here: 35 out of the 69 globally. 69 globally, women entrepreneurs who were self-made, 35 of them are from China.
Just out of curiosity, in terms of women empowerment, let's say for a male and female entrepreneurs, do they work in the same industry or sector?
Yes, these 350 people that I say, basically, they're all working in the same location.
So I was thinking maybe like women work more in the clothing industry.
No, we did not find that. According to our data, it was exactly the same. It did not matter.
That's very interesting.
And still, when you go to STEM, obviously, there are more male than female. But again, when you compare it to, for example, North America, there are actually more women in STEM programs, universities, engineering, and so on and so on in China than there are in North America in many places. So, again, this also has created some problems as well. So created that middle income problem, that there is a huge difference between different locations, different areas of China. For example, in the coastal area of China, still people have more earning than the central part of China. So if you look at this, Shanghai and Beijing municipality, metropolitan, basically, you might say like, what do you mean by rural or urban? It's just because, like similar to Vancouver itself is a metropolitan, but still we have a rural area where they're farming and many activities are farm-based. So Beijing and Shanghai also have like a rural area as well as urban area. So you can see that the difference not only between the cities, Shanghai itself is 53,000, whereas rural area is 23,000. But you can see that there's a much bigger. Oh, by the way, I think this is. I'm trying to remember. This was US dollar per year PPP, meaning that purchasing power parity. So you can see that the difference is huge, basically. Not only between urban area versus rural area of Shanghai, but also urban area of Shanghai versus Tibet and Jilin, which are the two very poor provinces. See how much difference it is. Like even the US, I think Canada is very similar to the US, but even in the US, I think the difference between income does not reach 50%. the income differences between different states. Whereas if you look at this, it's just 5,900 versus 53,000. That's a huge, huge difference. So that has created this problem, massive problem. One, how to improve those rural area, which I say, with the help of Alibaba and similar kind of companies, they're trying to basically help them to come out of that. They're trying to urbanize many of those places. But the second problem that has increased, that has provided, is with the younger generation, with the middle income people. So what happens with the younger people, younger generation of Chinese? So we have a few people who are entrepreneurial and want to basically start up a company or be innovative, like our own students, my students basically at Renmin University. A lot of them want to work and basically be innovative. But average person who's in Beijing, maybe not average person, many of the people who come to my university, if they're from Beijing, like I remember once in my MBA class, I asked about like 4 people who are from Beijing. Either themselves or their parents owned up to 4 apartments in Beijing. And to tell you what's actually the difference, think about Vancouver prices and add a little bit to it for a country like China. So a 1,000 square foot apartment in Beijing, not too far, not too central, not anything, could be up to $2 million. And that's an old building. I'm not talking about new building. So if you go for a new building, new structure, new kind of like apartment buildings, that could be up to $4 million. If it's near a good school, it's also like similar to a school catchment. If you're in that area, it could be much more expensive. So think about $2, $3, $4 million apartments and some students having 4 of them. Of course, it's because of privileges that they had and stuff. But we don't care about that kind of thing. As I said, one of the problems with that is the difference between income of these people. Like for example, my landlord, the last landlord I had, when I talked to him, he was a university professor from Tsinghua University and he retired. He himself said he had 7 houses in Beijing, apartments in Beijing, plus 1 farmland near Beijing, which was his villa that he used to go to. And he said he could care less about his salaries, his retirement, basically, pension. Because just each apartment, the rent was about 20,000 renminbi a month. 20,000 renminbi a month is about $4,000. So have 7 of them. So that's the amount. But one of the major, I'm just going to finish it in a second. So, but one of the major problems that this has created is not only allowed students or kids, the younger generation, to actually be entrepreneurial and have hope that I can do this, but also has created some other things. The lack of hope. The other way around, because they're so rich that they don't care. So one part of it is that, well, they're not being bullied by their parents anymore to go to STEM programs. They want to study art and music and philosophy and so on, on one hand. But on the other hand, the last 2 years, whether in my undergrad program or my PhD, my master's program, when I ask the students, because I teach in strategy, so I kind of tell them you have to set goals, you have to do this, that. So when I ask the students, what do you want to do? Set your goals. Short-term goals, long-term goals, medium, mid-term goals, and long-term goals. I'm not kidding you that 100% of them say they're going to retire when they're 50. For the past 2 years. When they're 50, they want to retire. That means, what kind of pressure that's going to have on the economy. And that's what middle income trap is. Because people feel so comfortable, so wealthy, that they don't want to work anymore. They don't want to innovate anymore. Because they can actually generate with whatever they have. And with that, I'm just going to finish it and leave time for more questions. Please.
But the government's increased the retirement age.
Not by much.
But it's more than it used to be.
Marginally. It's very small amount. Like for example, was 58 and became 60. And everybody has to retire at the age of 60. Like for example, I was just telling Rosalie, when I'm 60, I have to retire. It doesn't matter whether I want to stay or not. It's just like I have to retire. There's no way to take it. So they have put something that if I reach a certain level of scholarship, they would add 2 years of it. But you have to be a member of the party, you have to be well recognized, nationally, and so on and so on. And then they give you, 1 extra year or 2 extra years. But in general, no, it's not. It's still very early retirement.
I'd like to go back to the retired university professor with the 7 apartments. Does that mean that he didn't own any shares in Alibaba?
No, he didn't. He was actually very, very. He's one of the very few people who is not online. He didn't want to be online.
Sorry.
He was trying to be
Yeah,
offline.
I meant it as a figure of speech. I meant it in the context of, is it characteristic then to think of using your accumulated wealth to buy real estate and not shares in publicly traded companies?
Different people will do it differently. So, for example, in the same apartment that I live, I don't live there anymore, which I regret as well, because he basically said he doesn't care for money, and because he liked me, he basically gave me a huge discount. He's just like, and he never increased my rent, so I made a huge mistake when I left that apartment. But anyways, so he basically was like that, and he was very paranoid about being online or being checked, and I kind of forced him to buy a smart phone. He used to use those old phones that basically don't have internet on them. But at the same house, at the same apartment, I had a cleaning lady who would come like twice a week. She was from the rural area of Anhui. She did not know how to read and write that much. And I realized this much later, because when I would call her to ask her to do something, she would do it. But if I texted her to do something, she would not do that. And she wouldn't tell me, she didn't want to tell me that she couldn't read and write characters. Particularly, a foreigner writing characters and she cannot read characters was very embarrassing to her. But she had invested in the stock market, and she would do it on her phone. She would do it on her phone. She knew the symbols, she knew, she would check them, she would ask her son to check, companies for her. Even that person basically was investing online. And she would do that all online. So it doesn't matter how much money you have, it could be, many different reasons. Yes?
I want to ask you a question about you in your slides, you're talking about the innovation, the design, differentiating other people copycats. So copycats, as my understanding goes, is quite a phenomenon. Most people do copycatting things in China, and then it came into the original research. In your views, were there a lot of original research in terms of technology, in terms of, like, for example, the infrastructure? So these entrepreneurs can flourish, but you do need to have the infrastructure in place across the country for the drones, for the platform. And there were accusations about the spying, theft of technology, know-how from other countries. People did the research and then it was being copycat or stolen. What's your response to that in terms of the topic we're talking about?
Right, so almost any company that we look at basically has to start their innovation from somewhere. We cannot say we're going to go back to zero and assume that nothing existed. Like, for example, Yahoo started in 1995 as a search engine, as a portal, later became, and Google came. Almost did exactly the same thing. Nobody said Google was a copy then, because they enhanced their algorithm. Nobody ever said that they have copied Yahoo. If you actually search Google and do the same search on Yahoo, you would see that almost 90% of the results are almost identical. But Baidu, even though their patent is right there in their company, I've seen it, like I've been to the company, I've talked to the CEO and the VP several times. They have their patents basically framed in the front of their lobby, basically. And their patent is much earlier than Google's. And everybody says Baidu has copied Google. Whereas you can also do a very simple test. Exactly the same search term, put it in Baidu, you will get different results. So you would see that a lot of things that we hear is copycat is not necessarily copycats. It's just when people say copycat, as I said, that Wall Street Journal article, which was comparing Facebook versus WeChat and and then everybody basically was saying that WeChat was a copy of WhatsApp. But it's just totally different. I mean, people who know it will realize that how different they are. I'm not saying that there is no copycat. There are no copycats in China. Yes, there are. There are a lot of them as well. But majority of the developing countries, like think about, like for example, Singapore, think about Korea, Taiwan, Japan even, all of these countries started copying first. Started first providing OEM for all the US and developed countries companies, and gradually made it to the next level by adding value, being innovative in their own ways. Like many people say, Japanese, for example, try to minimize things, miniaturize everything. I don't think it's only that simple, but that's what people say. Some people might say. So Korea was the same. When they started the car manufacturers, they were copying everyone. They were using the joint ventures with American companies to learn from them. So that's how basically they learn, because they have to learn that knowledge. And they basically take it to the next level. Some of these people have done it. And again, I'm saying still the majority of the entrepreneurs in Chinese are copying. They're still not doing it. But those ones that we care and now we study, basically those are the ones who are innovative, who are actually taking that extra step. Those people that I showed their pictures, those are the real ones that actually want to go the next step.
So it is typical way for the developing countries to catch up with the developed countries in the early stages. But then there is will be a lot of protection measures from the government or from wherever, right? So in the case of China, and do you see there were lots of protection measures which exceeding the norm of other developing countries?
Exceeding the norms, they're trying. The problem, I think one of the major problems that I see about China is that people assume that the government is not going to do anything. But if the government, like for example, there is this thing I didn't know. It was in March, I was talking to a law professor from my university, and he was telling me this, that even in the silk market that I was just talking about, initially they were basically selling knockoffs of Nike, Gucci, whatever, all those ones. And everybody buys them, and they're sitting there. Apparently, there is a law. If anyone who buys from there goes and sues them through the government, saying that they were cheated because it is a knockoff and they're being left worse off, the government will go and find that company, that shop that basically has sold, and compensate the person as well. But has anyone ever sued? No. Almost any of the people, like we have people from, we have a group of EMBAs basically coming from Yale, a group of EMBAs coming from McGill, from many different universities, and we talk about these things in class. Every single one of them said, but intellectual property, there's a violation, da 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 da. And the same ones, as soon as the class is finished, they said, can you arrange us to sit in market shop?
Is it human weakness, right? That's a great part of it.
Yeah, I guess it's great. Yeah, it's like I was watching one movie yesterday. It was about outsourced. I don't know if anyone has seen this movie before. It's about outsourcing early days to India, American companies. And the person basically is yelling on the phone. One scene is that this person is yelling on the phone. So it's like, so you're saying manufacturing is done in China and now our services and sales force are also in India. What kind of American company are you? And the woman says basically, well, I have a phone number of a company that manufactures in the United States and sells in the United States by Americans. I can give you the number. And the guy said, what about price? I said, well, they're selling $250, we're selling $25. And the guy said, okay, never mind, just sell it to me. So this whole thing about, being manufactured in the US and so for a lot of users, as long as it's the cheaper one, we don't care.
Thank you. I wanted to ask your opinion on something. I don't know if there's this book out by Irene Son about it's called the Next Factory of the World, about Chinese investments going to Africa based on the flying geese theory. Yeah, so, and she also talks, or it's also based on the idea that labor cost in China is also increasing at a rapid rate. So I just wanted to ask, what's your view of that? How does the dynamic that you talked about?
Well, there's a bunch of research being done recently. There are lots of academic papers that are coming up, and they all basically ask about investment of China in Africa and what it's going to be, what's the next step, and so on and so on. Of course, there's hope that this is going to happen. To my experience, the CEOs of some of these companies that I've talked to, they have certain problems, particularly when it comes to Africa or many other kind of like developing countries in Southeast Asia or South Asia, that Chinese, again, going back to this concept that 40 years ago, China was probably worse than some of those African countries. So they're not used to management properly. Like even Americans, up to 1980s, basically they didn't have a proper international management practices. Very often they wanted to have this kind of like ethnocentric things that we are better than you and this is the way we do it, this is the way you should do it. So Chinese are also almost there still. Kind of like they don't know how to manage. Like for example, there is one company which is called, which is a construction company, one of the very most well-known companies, which is Beijing. So it's called Beijing Urban Construction Group. So they are known for their design because, Crow's Nest, basically in Beijing, the capital airport, Terminal 1, 2, 3, all of them are built by them. The National Museum was built by them. The Opera House was built by them. So all the very, very significant kind of areas in Beijing were built by them. They were invited to go build in Egypt, Algeria. They're building things in Iran. They're building things in Maldives. So when I was talking to them about what you do and how you do it, first they said, oh, everything is great. We have like lots of operations there and da 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 da. But when I started keep asking more about these things, they said they had problems. They didn't know how to work with local people. They could not incentivize, in all these locations that I say, they did not know how to incentivize all these people. So they could say like, oh, those Africans don't work, or those Southeast Asians don't work, they're lazy, da 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 da. But the bottom line is, they couldn't work with them. I clearly remember actually visited one of their sites in Iran, which was a very, very funny thing. So they were building a highway in Iran, which is about 120 kilometers highway. So they couldn't work with people in a way that in an entire 120 kilometers area, they had built walls with tin. And they had shipped their own people and their own equipment from China to build that highway in Iran. And they say they did the same thing in Maldives. They had built, kind of tin walls around their factories, around their construction site, and they were working. And this is like a labor work, and they said they couldn't work with local people. So I remember actually one part, I was passing this highway. In one location, there was this, they were delivering blocks of concrete. And the driver who was delivering was an Iranian, and then they had this crane that was lifting these blocks and was putting it inside the wall. But the person who was inside was Chinese, and these two people didn't speak each other's language. So the person inside was saying, for example, a little bit to the left in Chinese. Somebody over there would translate it in English and yell it in walkie-talkie. And then again, this side, there was another person who could speak English, would hear it and say like, oh, put it in the left, okay, and then translate it to the driver who was actually doing this. So think about how inefficient this work system is. But going back to your initial question, whether that's going to work, I think it's going to work because their approach in Africa, from my perspective, again, research is being done as we speak. I think their approach is very, very different from what the approach of colonial powers were. They're trying to enable local people, even though this company that I say had problems, but they're trying to enable the local people. They're trying to actually build things that are, again, as you remember, I said they're service-oriented and they're people-oriented. They're trying to actually enable the people. They're trying to build things that are for the local people, not because the government wants, but what the local people need. And maybe, or rather, I hope that's going to be the continue, and it's going to be the way that actually will enable Africa.
I mean, even in terms of the recency of the growth, part of our argument is that because China is familiar with that, the Chinese system is still familiar with that growth process, that it's easy to empathize with the situation in Africa.
They're trying. I mean, as you say, instead of having many political agendas, they basically go in and they want to build things that's basically you benefit as a local person and I benefit as Chinese business. At least that's the way I think it's going to work.
Thank you.
So I had a question about the title of the presentation, which is easier investment for other developing countries. It has been 19 to 20 years since Alibaba has been around, but we haven't seen some integrated platform flourishing in other developing countries. For example, Vietnam or India, even if they are highly digitized population. So my question is, do you think certain entrepreneurship model is unique to China, or if there's some lessons other developing countries can learn from China's new enterprises from our day?
So, good question. I think one of the things that also many other countries can do, India is a very special case. India and China definitely have problems with each other. I was in a talk with the UN, and then there were people from India, and everybody was saying India is very good at software, and many kind of have skills, particularly, for example, English language skills and so on, that are compatible. And both of these countries are the largest population. So China is good at manufacturing, and they're good at software, hardware. So if they got together, they could dominate the entire world. But for some reason, these two countries don't get along. Like Modi was in China, they tried to basically sell, sign agreements, but nothing happened. Once I was actually, when AID was in Bangalore, when was that? It was 2016, 15, 16. So when we were there, actually Minister of Trade of China was there, trying to talk to Indian government to build a highway that extends from Tibet all the way goes to Sri Lanka. Because they have developed the Sri Lankan ports and the highways, and they've built many infrastructure there. But for some reason, India doesn't want to cooperate. I know it's not one-sided. I'm not trying to say it's India's fault or China's fault. I don't know why they don't get along. But going back to your initial question about Alibaba, Alibaba, Jingdong, and Tencent, these three companies, are massively active in Southeast Asia and South Asia. So almost any kind of online platforms that are in these countries, basically either Alibaba or Jingdong or Tencent have shares in them. Central is one of the largest online retailers, as well as grocery store, department stores in Thailand. They already have a joint venture with Jingdong, and Jingdong is helping them to build their basically online platform. Gojek in Indonesia basically is a part of a conglomerate, basically has a lot of different online platforms, including food delivery, online shopping, cab drive, service calling, and so on, many of these ones. And guess who? Didi is with them, which is a part of Alibaba. But the problem is, when they go to those countries, these, as I said just earlier, instead of actually trying to integrate themselves into the local culture and be a part of the culture, they want to just, the money-making mentality. They still have not been able to customize themselves properly, and they don't work well necessarily with the local people. So yes, they are there, they're trying to help, but I think they don't know how to help.
I'd like to ask a question with regard to what is happening now with Trump's trade war with China. I mean, it's really not so much of a trade war, but the U.S. policy of containment of China, particularly with the invasion of China in 2025. So, in your opinion, do you think Trump's policy will hasten or dampen entrepreneurs spirit in China?
So there are two versions. One is basically my version. One is probably the Chinese version. So when I asked any Chinese, similar to almost any two countries that are at war, whether trade war or just pure war, basically many Chinese say like, oh, who needs them? Who cares? They're going to lose. We're more resilient than Americans, and we have people who can live on much less than Americans. So that's their version, but I don't think it's that simple. But having said that, I actually think very likely China is going to be more successful in this, because particularly when it comes to Trump's policies, Trump is a typical case of negotiation. He wants to basically destroy the status quo to basically be able to negotiate, and as he said it very openly at the UN, he wants to negotiate bilateral deals as opposed to kind of like multilateral. And that's his deal. I mean, if somebody like China, as they're trying to do, if other countries actually pick on that, they can easily basically make US not matter anymore. But the question is whether the EU, particularly Canada, they trust China. And I think that's the lack of trust that these countries have. Because China, with that Belt and Road that they've started, the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the bank that they have started, basically they're really kind of like there to be helping, helping any country to build their infrastructure or do business and expand over there. It's just a matter of their success, their absolute success, depends on whether countries like Canada or any of the EU countries tell the US that's enough, we're going to go to the other one. So I think that would be possible. But even if they don't, again, China, the market itself, is so huge that they don't necessarily rely so much on the other countries. It's just us, again, in our thirst for better or cheaper things, we go to China. But China itself has very, very huge market that doesn't really need anyone else. Or also those other countries around them. Like I was interviewing Xiaomi's VP of HR in 2012. And in 2012, Xiaomi, by the way, is one of the phone companies. I really like it because they're really, really good and innovative company. When I asked him whether they want to internationalize or not, he said, no, they have absolutely no plans on internationalizing. 2 years later, when I went there, their one building had expanded to 3 buildings because everybody in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia, in Russia, in India, basically everybody wanted their phones because their phones are quality phones, but 1/3 of the price of Apple products. And basically people were buying their products, but they had to basically, after 2 years when I went there, they had a floor almost like about 2,000 square meter. Huge. And they have had about 100 desks. Each desk had 1 or 2 flags on them because they had customer service taking care of that country. And he was right saying that he doesn't want to go to other countries because they have enough market in China. But they're internationalized because other people want their products. So if push comes to shove, China has enough people to sustain it. That's my opinion.
How about techniques like high-tech products? Like for the chips for the phones they import from the US?
I think China is moving away from there. Not only those examples that I gave, the car, Xiaomi, and all these ones. I don't think they're copying and they're approaching it from absolute cheapest. So from the past 20 years ago or 30 years ago, that China was going for the absolute cheapest. They're not going for that anymore. They're actually going for the higher technology and better products. So if you look at all the younger generation or many of the middle class people in China, whereas in for example 20 years ago, wherever they were going, they were always going for the cheapest products. If you had 5 products next to each other, and then they would ask prices, they would always pick up the cheapest one. But now it's not. We were talking to Rosalie, just like, for example, if you go to any of these kind of like high-end stores around Vancouver, you will see that the majority of the products are bought by Chinese. And these are high-end products. And the same as actually just now today, also I was reading some of the reports. It was by Forbes, I think. In fact, actually several of them basically have reported this, but I was reading a report by Forbes that many of the local technology, particularly products and brands, are replacing the international brands. And people are gradually moving towards, I like my own national brand, versus, for example, BMW and Apple and da-da-da-da. So there are actually good technology. Many of the companies worldwide are building their R&D centers in China because they know that the R&D centers in China are more efficient. Many of the car manufacturers are already there. So there is this new technology, smart cities are coming up. One company that I have some dealings with, basically they are working with the new generation of communication. So we're getting to 5G very soon. But 5G is the end of it. Technologically, for waves, that's the end of it, and we're not going to go beyond that. So, but we're going to smart cities, which we need massive communication capacity for cars to talk to infrastructure, houses to talk to each other, appliances. And guess what? Almost majority of the top US, Israeli, and German companies are building joint ventures, are working on this technology. They call it Li-Fi. As opposed to Wi-Fi, it's called Li-Fi, after light. So it's communication with the light.
How do you write it?
L-I-F-I.
So the growth, the China's growth, so it slowed down significantly. So how do you see the future of that?
Well, I don't think it's possible to. There are several things. First, they have been planning to slow the growth. I remember reading some papers back in the day when I was at Peking University that Deng Xiaoping in 1978, he had said that they want to reach GDP per capita of the US by 2050. And he basically back then had said that if we reach that point earlier, then we're going to have major, social problems that the rest of the country cannot catch up. So we want to go slower. First is that. Secondly, country of any kind, I don't think they can sustain such a huge growth. And thirdly, I think even though it's dropped, still is not dropped. Like for example, it still is one of the top kind of like growth economies in the world.
It is only single digits
Yes.
in comparisons speaking.
Yes. So it's not really stopped. It's just like slowed down a little bit, I would say.
What about the disparity in terms of the income between the rural and urban? How much it would impact on the mid-term or the long term? And how much the income trap that you refer to would impact the growth in the future?
As I said, if it creates the middle income trap, which some people will speculate that it's going to, and some people say no, it depends on how much younger generation, the new entrepreneurs, are going to feel too comfortable to go work and be innovative. That's one thing. Secondly, it's going to have a social impact as income disparity between regions. It means that they're going to migrate from those poorer area to the rural area. So the government has some measures, which is called hukou and many other ones, that basically are trying to kind of like keep that happening. But I don't think that's a long-term solution. The government has to, and that's why they started with Alibaba's, Taobao centers. Taobao centers setting up around in the rural areas because they want to make sure that all these people around there also going to become economically kind of more developed. We're also seeing that not multinationals, a lot of, in early days, China was thinking all the multinationals as the coastal area are going to become super rich and because GDP is going to increase, salaries are going to increase, they're going to move to kind of like central parts or southern parts or western parts. But most multinationals did not. Particularly, they decided to go to Africa, to Vietnam, to Indonesia. But now we see gradually some of the local Chinese companies are moving to the east, to the west, and maybe, hopefully, they can basically change that kind of like disparity.
because at one point in history, if there's extreme income inequality, that sets up for social unrest.
Yes.
And that for revolutions. So that's great fear.
Yes. It was, in fact, the same guy who is behind that NIO, NIO. He was my best friend at university, my undergrad days. Whenever in 1990s, early 1990s, when we were talking, almost all of us were saying that by 2013 or 15, this is going to catch up and something is going to happen. And we were all saying that we have to leave the country around that year. In fact, actually, when I went for the car lunch, which was again 2017, I said, do you still remember? He said, yes, but it hasn't happened. He said he still thinks that it's going to happen. But when, we don't know. I think what has happened, that still a lot of people feeling comfortable with it, with their opportunities. Maybe that's why.
Just an observation from this session, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way the business environment in China is formulated to the ease of the locals, I mean the Chinese people living in China. And if you want to compare it with outside, let's say if we talk about the ease of doing business, the inflow of FDI or outflow and all this, China doesn't rank on the top, if I remember well the numbers. So it is pretty much customized only for the locals, and it's not something that we can take it to the outside from outside or take a lesson per se to apply it somewhere.
A lot of things that are there, as I say, the public-private partnership and being for the people, both government and the private sector, services and for the people as opposed to for the sake of business. And I think that's the important thing that if other countries try to do. Again, copying that model might not be as easy as we say because they already have their social structures that basically they cannot get rid of. But to some degree, they might be able to replicate some of those things. And one thing to add to earlier what I said, Carolyn, what you say basically, the create social unrest. I think one of the other reasons that a lot of countries with that kind of income disparity have social unrest is the lack of jobs. There's a lack of growth. Whereas in China, there's still unemployment is very low. Like for example, cities like Beijing. Beijing's unemployment rate is 0.1. And Shanghai is less than 0.1. So thinking about this, why would anyone want to just stand up and revolution just create social unrest when everybody is actually earning money?
I heard about that Gini coefficient by Renmin University said it's about 0.6 now. Is that true? And you said that average Beijing people, individual has about 8 houses.
No, that's not what I said. No, that's not what I said. You're repeating Trump's fashion here. I said in one of my classes, I asked some of my Beijing students, and they had up to 4 houses. And I said, my landlord had 8 houses. But it is an average Chinese house.
Yeah. But my question is, if there are large part of people have that so many houses, so is that would be a problem that their next generation inherits their houses? That's the house market would crash, because they have so many houses that they don't need that many houses, right?
I think they do. And that's the difference between bubble and, because it's supply demand, yeah? So Beijing, Shanghai, maybe they're trying similar to what Vancouver is trying to do. They're trying to oversupply housing, so the price decreases the price of housing. But in case of Vancouver, maybe it works because true that there is a inward migration to Vancouver, but it's not as much, and particularly because it's becoming more and more expensive, inward migration has slowed down. Whereas in Beijing and Shanghai and many other cities in China, basically that inward migration still continues. We still have a huge portion of the population don't have property, and there is demand for it, at least now. Maybe 20 years, 30 years down the road, maybe that might happen. But at the moment, it doesn't. And that's also one of the things that the government is doing. They're trying to oversupply housing so it decreases the price of housing. But it has not happened. Second, similar to unemployment rate that is very low in many places in China, price of property is still going up almost in every single city in China. So that's very different from Canada, that we see prices only increasing in Vancouver and in Toronto, not in many other places. It's not increasing anymore. Whereas this increase is happening in every other city. So other cities cannot be or are not going to be as offended to say like, how come their prices are increasing and my prices are not increasing? No, they're also increasing. Almost everybody is enjoying the wealth. It's not the same rate as Beijing. Like for example, price of property in the city of Xi'an from about 12,000 RMB per square meter has increased now to 40,000. Price of property in Tongzhou, for example, from when I went in 2011, it was only 12,000 RMB. Now it's almost over 40,000 RMB per square meter. So all of these cities are improving. And that's why, because there's a demand, I don't think it's going to happen. Yes?
I remember hearing that China was kind of setting up for maybe a problem with an aging population soon.
The what, sorry, you saying?
China might be facing an aging population soon.
Oh, absolutely.
So what is the kind of the plan to deal with that? Because I know that we're kind of trying to immigrate our way out of it, but if China's not, what is there?
This is one of those things. I don't know what China is really doing because they have not said much about it. So what they have done, they have abolished the one-child policy. And they thought there's going to be a lot of people are going to go and just give birth to children. Well, it didn't happen. Still, many people, particularly in the largest cities, don't want to have more children because it's difficult, expensive, and so on and so on. So what is the next step? I don't know. They still don't want inward migration. And that's one of the things that I know. The population has plateaued for a while, has even declined, I think, last year, but has not increased. So what they're going to do, increase the retirement age, to basically help with that, ease up the pressure. But still, they have a lot of things to do. What they want to do, I really don't know.
We'll officially close the session. It's 3:30. Thank you very much, Majid, for giving us a very We'll stay around for a little bit to review.
And this is my email address, if anyone has questions.
It's a long one, but...